I was standing there, holding a dusty mason jar filled with loose coins. Quarters, dimes, and some pennies, none of them shiny. No bow, no note. Just a jar of forgotten change, handed to me with a crooked smile by my daughter-in-law Amber. Meanwhile, right there at the same table, my son Michael stood up, made a toast, and handed her mother, a woman I barely know, a land deed wrapped in gold ribbon. A full residential plot, 2 acres paid in full just 10 minutes from downtown Burlington. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said to Darlene, his mother-in-law. And then he turned to me. "Hope you like it too, Dad. It's symbolic. You always said every penny counts." I smiled, nodded, even chuckled. But inside, something shattered. The room clapped. Darlene cried. Amber recorded everything on her phone. And I quietly got up, took my sad little jar, and went back to the kitchen to finish cleaning dishes I hadn't even eaten from. My name is Walter Henderson. For 42 years, I fixed everything that broke in the Burlington School District. Leaky pipes, faulty wiring, broken desks. I raised my son alone after my wife Sarah passed from cancer 5 years ago. I taught him about honor, about hard work, about being a man who stands by his word. At least, I thought I had. Christmas had always been special in our family. Sarah would decorate every corner of the house with handmade ornaments. When she was gone, I kept the tradition alive. This year, I spent 3 weeks preparing, hanging lights despite my arthritic knees, baking her special gingerbread recipe, even carving wooden ornaments in my workshop for each family member. Michael and Amber had insisted on hosting Christmas dinner this year. It was the first time in my son's 34 years of life that we hadn't celebrated in my home. I should have seen it coming. When I arrived at their sprawling suburban house, the down payment for which came from my retirement savings, I noticed Darlene's BMW parked in what used to be my spot whenever I visited. Inside, family photos that once included me had been replaced with vacation pictures of Michael, Amber, and Darlene in Cancun. "Dad, you're finally here," Michael said, barely looking up from his phone. "Can you help move those boxes to the garage? We need the space." The boxes contained my late wife's china, the set I'd given them last year. Now it was being stored away. I spent the first hour in the kitchen, finishing the cooking that Amber had barely started. I heard laughter from the living room. Michael, Amber, Darlene, and a few of their friends I didn't recognize. No one called me to join. Dinner itself was awkward. Darlene dominated the conversation, talking about her cruise plans and her new condo in Florida. Amber hung on her every word. Michael kept refilling their wine glasses while mine stood empty. "Walter," Darlene said, my name sounding foreign on her lips. "Michael tells me you're thinking of downsizing. Smart move at your age." I wasn't. I had never mentioned downsizing. My 2-story craftsman home was where Sarah and I had built our life, where Michael had grown up. It was paid off, solid, with a workshop in the back where I spent my days crafting furniture. "I'm quite happy where I am," I said quietly. "Well, you know what they say about old dogs and new tricks," she laughed, and Amber joined in. Michael gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Pity? Embarrassment? Something else entirely? When gift-giving time came, I watched as Michael and Amber exchanged expensive presents. She got a diamond bracelet. He got a designer watch. Darlene received not only the land deed but also a fur coat and a cruise voucher. Then came my turn. The jar of coins landed in my hands with a thud. "It's from both of us," Amber said, though Michael looked away. "We know how you like to save every penny." What they didn't know, or perhaps chose to forget, was that those saved pennies had put Michael through college, had funded their wedding, had helped them buy their first car, their house. I thanked them politely, placed the jar beside me, and continued eating the pie I had baked myself, using Sarah's recipe that no one had commented on. Later that night, as I drove home in the snow, the jar rattled in the passenger seat where my wife used to sit. For the first time since her funeral, I cried openly. Not because of the gift itself. Material things had never mattered much to me, but because in that moment, I realized I had become invisible to my own son. At home, I placed the jar on my workbench and stared at it for a long time. Then I opened a drawer and pulled out a folder, one I had been keeping updated for years, though I had hoped never to use it. Inside were documents, bank statements, transfers, notes about conversations, a timeline of little betrayals I had chosen to ignore. You see, I might be old, I might be quiet, but I'm not stupid, and by morning, everyone would know it. Dawn broke gray and cold over Burlington. I hadn't slept. Instead, I had spent the night in my workshop, the one place where I still felt like myself. My fingers, calloused from decades of honest work, traced the grain of the oak box I had crafted months ago. A beautiful piece with dovetail joints and a smooth finish. I had originally intended it as a gift for Michael and Amber's anniversary, but now it would serve a different purpose. I meticulously arranged the contents inside. Copies of bank transfers showing the $20,000 I had given them for their house down payment, labeled as a loan in Michael's handwriting, though he had called it a gift when asking. Printouts of emails I had discovered months ago when Michael had used my computer and forgotten to log out, emails between him and Amber discussing how to handle Dad's assets when the time comes. And most damning of all, a copy of a life insurance policy taken out on me without my knowledge, with Amber listed as the sole beneficiary. I had discovered that last item by accident 3 months ago. A letter had come addressed to Michael at my home address, an old habit from when mail sometimes still came to him here. It had been open, and thinking it was junk, I'd glanced at it. It was a premium notice for a policy I never knew existed. I also included a letter I had written overnight, my handwriting steady despite my shaking heart. To whom it may concern. If you are reading this, you are likely a neighbor, friend, or official who has found reason to be concerned. For 42 years, I served this community by fixing what was broken. Now I find myself unable to fix what matters most, my relationship with my son. The enclosed documents tell a story I have been reluctant to face. They show a pattern of financial exploitation and emotional abandonment that I can no longer ignore. I am not sharing this out of vengeance, but out of self-preservation. I am of sound mind. I am not in danger, but I am being systematically erased from my own family. And before that erasure is complete, I want the truth to be known. With respect and regret, Walter Henderson. At exactly 6:07 a.m., I placed the box on my front porch, in plain view of the street. Then I sat down in my rocking chair by the window, made a cup of coffee, and waited. Carol Andrews, my neighbor of 20 years, was the first to notice. She was walking her golden retriever, Max, as she did every morning at 6:30. I watched as curiosity drew her to my porch. She hesitated, then opened the box. Even from inside, I could see her face change as she read the letter. Then, examined the documents. She looked up at my window. Our eyes met. She nodded once, a gesture of understanding that carried more respect than any words could convey, then pulled out her phone. By 7:15, her husband Jim was at my door, his face grave. "Walt, can I come in?" he asked when I opened the door. I stepped aside, letting him into the home that had once been filled with family laughter but now echoed with silence. "Carol showed me what was in the box," he said, settling into the chair across from mine. "Is it all true?" "Every word," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "I've been keeping track for years, hoping I was wrong, hoping there was some explanation." Jim, a retired police officer, rubbed his weathered face. "Have you confronted Michael about any of this?" "What would be the point?" I asked. "He'd deny it, or worse, he'd confirm it, and I'd have to face that my son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, to fish, to be honest, had been planning to—" I couldn't finish. "To take advantage of you," Jim completed my thought. "Walt, this is elder financial abuse. It's a crime." I shook my head. "I don't want him arrested. I just want people to know who he's become. That I see what's happening." Jim looked at me for a long moment. "What you did? Putting that box out there? It's going to cause an explosion. Are you ready for that?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I showed it to Jim. "Word travels fast," I said, declining the call. Within the hour, 3 more neighbors had stopped by. By 9 o'clock, a police cruiser pulled up, responding to what they called a welfare check. Someone, likely Michael, had called, claiming I was confused, possibly suffering from dementia, distributing nonsensical documents. Officer Rodriguez, young enough to be my grandson, sat awkwardly on my couch while I calmly explained the situation. Jim stayed, vouching for my mental clarity. The officer seemed relieved when his radio crackled with a more urgent call. "Mr. Henderson, you seem perfectly fine to me," he said, standing to leave. "Just be aware that family matters can get complicated. If you feel unsafe at any point, don't hesitate to call us." As the cruiser pulled away, a familiar SUV screeched to a halt in front of my house. Michael burst out, Amber right behind him. Their faces were masks of rage and panic. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" Michael shouted as he stormed up the walkway. "Have you lost your mind?" I stood on my porch, the same porch where I had taught him to tie his shoes, where we had sat together after Sarah's funeral, where he had once promised to always look after me as I had looked after him. "No, son," I said calmly. "For the first time in years, I think I've found it." Michael's face contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. Amber stood slightly behind him, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. I noticed she was recording, a detail that didn't surprise me but still stung. "You need to take that box down right now," Michael hissed, lowering his voice as he noticed Mrs. Petrillo from across the street slowing her car to watch. "People are talking, Dad. They're saying horrible things about us." "What kinds of things?" I asked, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. He struggled to say it, "that we're stealing from you, exploiting you. Do you have any idea how that makes us look?" Not how it hurt me, not whether it was true, how it made them look. "The truth rarely flatters us, son," I said, suddenly feeling every one of my 73 years. "Would you like to come inside to discuss this, or would you prefer to continue this conversation where the neighbors can hear?" His eyes darted around, noticing the curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. Burlington was a small community, and news, especially scandalous news, traveled fast. "Fine," he muttered, grabbing Amber's arm and pulling her toward the, door. Inside, the house felt smaller with their anger filling it. Michael paced the living room while Amber perched on the edge of the couch, still filming discreetly. "Amber," I said gently, "I'd appreciate it if you'd stop recording this private family discussion." Her eyes widened in surprise at being caught. She glanced at Michael, who nodded curtly, and she reluctantly put the phone away. "What is wrong with you?" Michael exploded once the phone was down. "A jar of coins? That's what this is about? You're humiliating us over a Christmas gift?" I shook my head slowly. "This isn't about the jar, Michael, though I have to say it was quite illuminating." "It was a joke," Amber interjected, her voice high and defensive. "We were going to give you your real gift later. We have it at home." "There is no other gift," I said softly, "just as there was no birthday gift last month, or Father's Day gift before that, just as there have been no visits unless you needed something, no calls unless there was a favor to ask." Michael's face flushed. "We're busy. We have careers, a life, and a life insurance policy," I finished for him. "On me. One I never consented to." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's face drained of color. Amber's eyes darted to the door as if calculating an escape route. "How did you—" Michael started. "The premium notice came here," I explained. "But that's just one piece. There's also the matter of the emails discussing my assets and how to handle me. The fraudulent signature on my bank authorization form last spring. The fact that you've been telling people I'm becoming confused when I've never been more clear-headed in my life." Amber stood up abruptly. "We need a lawyer," she said to Michael, not even bothering to include me in the conversation. "He can't just make accusations like this." "They're not accusations if they're documented," I replied, walking to my desk and pulling out a second folder, identical to the one in the box outside. "Would you like to see?" Michael stared at the folder like it might bite him. "Dad, you're blowing this out of proportion. Yes, we took out a policy, but it's standard practice. It's responsible planning." "Without telling me?" I asked. "Without making me the beneficiary of my own policy or at least discussing it? And what about the land deed you gave Darlene yesterday? The same plot we looked at 2 years ago when I mentioned wanting to build a small workshop away from the city?" His jaw tightened. "That was different. Darlene needed—" "What did Darlene need that I didn't?" I interrupted, surprising even myself with the edge in my voice. "What has she done to deserve such generosity while your own father gets pocket change?" "She supports us," Amber snapped. "She doesn't judge us or make us feel guilty all the time." "When have I ever made you feel guilty?" I asked genuinely. "Every time you mention the down payment," Michael muttered. "Every time you bring up college tuition or the wedding. It's always about what you've done for me, for us." I sat down heavily in Sarah's old armchair, the one I could never bring myself to replace. "I've mentioned those things exactly once each, when you asked for them. I've never brought them up since. Not once." Michael looked away, unable to meet my eyes because we both knew I was right. "What do you want from us?" Amber asked coldly. "Money?" Is that what this public shaming is about? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the woman my son had fallen in love with, but a stranger who viewed me as an obstacle. Perhaps she always had. I want nothing from you, I said quietly. Not anymore. What I want is for the truth to be known. I want my neighbors, my real family now, to understand that if something happens to me, it wasn't confusion or age or an accident. I want a record of what's been happening. You're paranoid, Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, I replied. I'm protecting myself, something I should have done long ago. Just then, a knock at the door interrupted us. I rose to answer it, finding Jim and Carol on the porch, along with 3 other neighbors. Behind them, I could see Darlene's BMW pulling up. Everything okay in there, Walt? Jim asked, his eyes moving past me to where Michael and Amber stood. We're just having a family discussion, I said. Well, we thought you might like some company for lunch, Carol said pointedly. We brought sandwiches. Enough for everyone. Her emphasis on everyone made it clear this was no casual visit. This was a statement of solidarity. Darlene emerged from her car, striding toward my house with entitlement in every step. What is going on here? She demanded, her voice carrying down the street. Michael, why are people saying these terrible things? Before anyone could answer, Mrs. Petrillo, who had taught 3rd grade for 40 years before retiring, stepped forward. Because they're true, Darlene. We've all seen how Walter has been treated, and we've had enough. The next few hours passed in a blur of confrontations and revelations. My small living room became the stage for a drama I never wanted, but could no longer avoid. Neighbors came and went, some staying just long enough to express their support, others lingering to witness the unraveling of appearances my son and his wife had so carefully constructed. Darlene, to her credit, was a masterful performer. She cried at precisely the right moments, expressed shock at allegations she had clearly known about, and positioned herself as an innocent bystander to whatever misunderstanding was occurring. Walter, she said, her voice dripping with false concern, I had no idea you felt this way. If I'd known the land meant something to you, I never would have accepted it. The land is the least of it, Carol interjected before I could respond. She had appointed herself my unofficial advocate, a role I was grateful for as exhaustion. Began to settle into my bones. This is about a pattern of behavior. Walter has documentation. Documentation can be misinterpreted, Michael said stiffly. He hadn't moved from his position by the fireplace, the same fireplace where his childhood stockings had once hung. Dad's been under a lot of stress since Mom died. Sometimes he sees things that aren't there. The collective intake of breath from my neighbors told me everything I needed to know about how that statement landed. I taught your boy in 3rd grade, Mrs. Petrillo said, her voice quiet but sharp as a tack. I remember when he broke Tommy Wilson's science project. He denied it then too, even with paste on his hands. Michael flushed deeply, the memory clearly striking home. By mid-afternoon, word had spread beyond our immediate circle. Pastor Reynolds from the community church arrived, followed by Dr. Abernathy, who had been my physician for decades. Their presence lent a gravity to the situation that even Amber couldn't dismiss with her usual eye-rolling. Perhaps, Pastor Reynolds suggested gently, this would be a good time for reflection rather than accusations. Walter has raised concerns that should be addressed with compassion and honesty. We've done nothing wrong, Amber insisted, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. This is a private family matter that's being blown completely out of proportion. Elder abuse is never a private matter, Dr. Abernathy said firmly. It's a community concern. Abuse? Michael exploded. Nobody's abusing anyone. A Christmas gift you don't. Like isn't abuse, Dad. I had been quiet for some time, watching, listening, processing the support I never expected to receive. Now I stood up slowly, and the room fell silent. The jar of coins was never the issue, Michael, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It was the culmination, the final confirmation that I had become an afterthought in your life, a problem to manage, not a father to honor. I walked to the mantel and picked up a framed photo, Michael's college graduation. My arm was around his shoulders, both of us beaming with pride. I don't need expensive gifts. I don't need land deeds or luxury cruises. What I needed, what I've always needed, was to know that the values I tried to instill in you took root. Honesty, respect, compassion. I set the photo down, turning it, face down on the mantel in a gesture that wasn't planned but felt necessary. The life insurance policy without my knowledge or consent? That crossed a line from thoughtlessness into something darker. The emails about handling my assets? The forged signatures? Those aren't misunderstandings, son. Those are calculated actions. The room was so quiet you could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, a wedding gift to Sarah and me from her parents, now keeping time in a world they wouldn't recognize. "What do you want us to do?" Michael finally asked, his voice smaller than I'd heard it since he was a child, afraid of thunderstorms. "I want you to leave," I said simply. "All three of you. I want you to take responsibility for your actions, make amends where possible, and reflect on the people you've become." Darlene started to protest, but Amber silenced her with a look. Something had shifted in the room, perhaps the realization that their carefully constructed narrative was crumbling under the weight of community witness. "Fine," Michael said tightly, "but this isn't over. You've humiliated us in front of the entire neighborhood. There will be consequences." It was the wrong thing to say, and he knew it immediately. Several neighbors straightened in their seats, their expressions hardening. "The only consequences," Jim said quietly, "will be the natural results of your own actions, Michael. Nothing more, nothing less." As they gathered their coats and prepared to leave, I felt a curious lightness. Not happiness. The situation was far too painful for that. But the unburdening that comes with truth finally spoken aloud. At the door, Michael paused, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy he had been, uncertain, seeking guidance. But then Amber touched his arm, and the mask slid back into place. "We'll be in touch through our attorney," he said coldly. I nodded. I expected nothing less. As their cars pulled away, my neighbors surrounded me, not with questions or pity, but with the quiet solidarity of people who had seen an injustice and refused to remain silent. "What now, Walt?" Carol asked gently. I looked around at the home that had witnessed my greatest joys and deepest sorrows. The home where I had raised my son, loved my wife, built a life of quiet dignity. "Now," I said, "we have lunch, and tomorrow we begin again." The next morning dawned clear and cold. January in Vermont never apologized for its harshness, and today was no exception. I woke early, as I had for decades. Old habits formed during years of pre-dawn maintenance shifts at the school were impossible to break, even in retirement. The house felt different somehow, lighter despite the heavy situation. The truth has a way of clearing the air, even when it hurts. I made coffee and carried it to the front porch, bundled in Sarah's old quilt. The box was gone. Jim had suggested I bring it inside once it had served its purpose, but its absence didn't mean people had forgotten. Mrs. Hathaway from 2 doors down waved as she collected her newspaper. The Ramirezes slowed their car as they passed, offering a supportive nod. My phone had been buzzing since dawn. Michael had called 3 times, leaving increasingly agitated voicemails. Amber had sent a series of texts ranging from apologetic to threatening. Darlene surprisingly remained silent. At 9:30, a sleek black sedan pulled up in front of my house. A young woman in a charcoal suit emerged, carrying a leather portfolio. My stomach tightened. This had to be the attorney Michael had threatened. "Mr. Henderson?" she called as she approached the porch. "My name is Rebecca Chen. I'm an attorney with Caldwell and Associates." I nodded, not bothering to rise. I figured Michael would move quickly. She climbed the steps, her expression professional but not unkind. "Actually, I'm not here on behalf of your son. I'm here because Judge Caldwell saw your documentation. He's an old friend of Jim Andrews, I believe." That surprised me. Robert Caldwell had been a judge in Burlington for as long as I could remember, known for his no-nonsense approach and impeccable ethics. "Jim mentioned he might speak to some people," I admitted. "Please, come in. It's too cold to talk business out here." Inside, Ms. Chen declined coffee, but accepted a seat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had taught Michael to do his homework, where Sarah and I had planned our modest future. "Mr. Henderson, what happened to you is unfortunately common," she began, opening her portfolio. "Elder financial exploitation is one of the fastest-growing forms of abuse, and family members are often the perpetrators. I didn't come forward to pursue legal action," I said quickly. "I just wanted protection, peace of mind." She nodded. "I understand. But Judge Caldwell felt strongly that you should be aware of your options. What your son and daughter-in-law have done. The unauthorized insurance policy, The forged signatures, the manipulation. These are serious offenses. They're still my family, I said, surprised by the crack in my voice. Ms. Chen's expression softened. That's why these cases are so difficult. The emotional betrayal compounds the financial one. She laid out several documents explaining each one carefully. There were options for a restraining order, for financial restitution, even for criminal charges. Each possibility made my heart heavier. Can I think about this? I finally asked. Of course, she replied, gathering the papers into a folder and handing it to me. Take all the time you need. My card is inside. Judge Caldwell wanted me to tell you that if you decide to pursue any of these options, he will ensure your case is handled with discretion and respect. After she left, I sat for a long time, staring at the folder without opening it. The weight of decisions pressed down on me. I had. Expose the truth? Yes, but what came next? The doorbell rang again at noon. This time it was Carol, carrying a casserole dish. Thought you might not feel like cooking, she said, bustling past me into the kitchen. Jim and I made lasagna, Sarah's recipe, actually. I hope that's okay. I was touched that she remembered. Sarah had shared her secret recipe, heavy on the garlic, light on the, oregano, with Carol years ago during a neighborhood potluck. That's very kind, I said, helping her set the table. An attorney came by this morning. Carol paused, her expression cautious. Michael's? No, one sent by Judge Caldwell. Jim's doing, apparently. She nodded, unsurprised. Jim's been worried about you for months. He noticed things before any of us did. How Michael stopped coming. Around how you seemed more isolated. The jar of coins just confirmed what he suspected. I hadn't realized my situation had been so transparent to others when I had barely admitted it to myself. What are you going to do? She asked gently. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to let it all go, pretend yesterday never happened, and try to salvage whatever relationship might still be possible with Michael. Another part wants justice, she finished for me. I nodded, surprised by the tears that suddenly threatened. Is it wrong to want your own son to face consequences for his actions? Carol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It's not wrong to expect accountability, Walter. Especially from family. We ate in companionable silence for a while. The lasagna tasted like memories, like family dinners and birthdays and the life Sarah and I had built together. You know, Carol said as we finished, whatever you decide, you're not alone in this. The neighborhood has your back. After she left, I pulled out the folder Ms. Chen had given me and finally began to read through my options. Each legal pathway seemed both necessary and impossible. How had it come? To this? How had the son I raised, the boy who once looked at me with such admiration, become someone I needed protection from? The afternoon mail brought another surprise, a thick envelope from Burlington Community Bank. Inside was a letter explaining that unusual activity had been flagged on my accounts. Multiple large withdrawal attempts using my online banking credentials, all within the past 24 hours. The bank had frozen the accounts pending my in-person verification, a security measure triggered by the pattern of activity. The letter included a printout of the attempted transactions, 3 separate tries to transfer nearly my entire savings, almost $175,000 to an account I didn't recognize. I sat down hard, my hands shaking. This wasn't just about a jar of coins or hurt feelings or even a life insurance policy. This was a desperate grab for everything I had worked for my entire life. I called Jim immediately. They tried to clean me out, I said when he answered. The bank caught it, but they tried. His response was immediate. I'll be right over. And Walt? Don't call Michael. Not yet. 30 minutes later, Jim was at my kitchen table, examining the bank documents while making calls. By evening, we had filed a police report, met with the bank manager, and changed every password and security question I had. As darkness fell, I stood at my living room window, watching the neighborhood lights come on one by one. Each illuminated window represented a family, a story, connections that might be complicated, but were rooted in genuine care. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. This has gone far enough, Dad. Call off your attack dogs or things will get worse. I showed it to Jim, who had insisted on staying for dinner. That, he said grimly, is all the evidence you need about who your son has become. I nodded, my decision finally clear. The next week passed in a flurry of legal proceedings and community support that left me both exhausted and oddly renewed. Ms. Chen moved with impressive efficiency, securing an emergency protection order that prevented Michael, Amber, or Darlene from accessing my property or accounts. The attempted bank transfers, which Michael denied any knowledge of despite the transactions being traced to his IP address, provided irrefutable evidence that their intentions went beyond thoughtlessness into calculated exploitation. Detective Santos, a serious woman with kind eyes, interviewed me at length about the pattern of behavior, taking copies of all my documentation. "We see this more often than you'd think, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Family members assuming an elderly relative won't notice or fight back. They're usually wrong on both counts." I bristled slightly at being categorized as elderly. In my mind, I was still the man who could fix a boiler and build a cabinet in the same day, but I understood her point. "Will my son go to jail?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me. She hesitated. "That depends on several factors, including whether you want to press charges and how the evidence develops. Financial crimes like these are serious, but first-time or offenders often receive probation, mandatory financial education, and restitution orders rather than incarceration." The thought of Michael in handcuffs made my stomach turn, despite everything. He was still the baby I had held through colicky nights, the boy who had sobbed in my arms when his first girlfriend broke his heart, the young man who had helped me care for Sarah in her final days. Had he changed? Or had the potential for this betrayal always been there, dormant beneath the surface of our relationship? On Wednesday, I received an unexpected visitor. Pastor Reynolds arrived in the late afternoon, his ancient station wagon announcing his presence with its distinctive rumble. "Walter," he said when I opened the door, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I replied, genuinely pleased to see him. The pastor had been a quiet presence in my life for decades, officiating at Sarah's funeral, stopping by occasionally for coffee and conversation. "I've been to see Michael," he said once we were settled in the living room. I stiffened. "I have a protection order." "I'm aware," he nodded. This was a pastoral visit, not an attempt to mediate. I felt obligated to speak with him about the choices he's made. The church has always taken a stand against elder abuse, even when, especially when, it's uncomfortable to do so. "How is he?" I couldn't help asking. Pastor Reynolds considered his words carefully. "Angry, defensive, but beneath that, I think he's afraid. The house of cards he and Amber built is collapsing. His job is in jeopardy. Apparently his employers take a dim view of financial impropriety. Amber's real estate clients are canceling. Darlene has returned to Florida, distancing herself from the situation. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a profound sadness. They're experiencing the natural consequences of their actions," Pastor Reynolds continued, "which is not punishment, Walter. It's justice. There's a difference." "Does it matter if the results are the same?" I asked. "It matters tremendously," he replied. "Punishment seeks to hurt. Justice seeks to restore balance. One comes from vengeance, the other from truth." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock. Finally, I asked the question that had been circling in my mind for days. "Can a relationship be restored after something like this?" Pastor Reynolds sighed deeply. "That depends on many things, most importantly whether there is genuine remorse and a commitment to change. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, Walter. You can release the anger without resuming the relationship on its former terms." After he left, I went to my workshop, the one place where I still felt fully myself. I ran my hands over the half-finished rocking chair I had been building for months. It was meant to be a companion piece to the one Sarah and I had shared on the porch for so many evenings. As I worked, sanding and shaping the wood with careful precision, my mind kept returning to Pastor Reynolds' words. Forgiveness without reconciliation. The concept was both liberating and painful. By Friday, word had spread beyond our neighborhood. The local paper ran a small article about financial exploitation of seniors, not naming names, but clearly inspired by my situation. The senior center where I occasionally taught woodworking classes called to ask if I would consider leading a workshop on financial safety for elders. Life was continuing, reshaping itself around the broken pieces of what had been. Saturday morning. Brought a letter, an actual paper letter, in an envelope with a stamp, something so rare these days it immediately caught my attention. The return address was Michael and Amber's, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside was a single page of flowery stationery and an unsigned note in careful cursive. "Mr. Henderson, you don't know me, but I've been working as a housekeeper for your son and a daughter-in-law for the past 2 years. I've overheard things I shouldn't have, seen documents I wasn't meant to see. I've been struggling with what to do with this knowledge. When the news about what they did to you spread, I knew I had to reach out. There are more documents, emails, bank statements, plans, things they didn't think anyone would find in the desk drawer I was asked to organize, but never to clean inside. I can't come forward publicly. I need this job. But I wanted you to know that there's more evidence if you need it, and that not everyone who enters their home is blind to who they really are. I'm sorry for what they've done to you. My own father worked his whole life to give us a better one, just like you did for your son. Some people never learn gratitude. A friend. I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling slightly. Then I called Ms. Chen. Ms. Chen arrived within the hour, her weekend plans apparently less important than the potential breakthrough the letter represented. She read it carefully, her expression growing more focused with each line. "This could be significant," she said, placing the letter in a clear protective sleeve. "Anonymous witnesses are complicated from a legal perspective, but this suggests there's documentary evidence we haven't seen yet. Can we use it?" I asked, uncertain about the ethics of information obtained this way. "We can use it as investigative direction," she replied. "If this person is correct about additional documents, we can request them through proper legal channels now that we know they exist." She made several calls, speaking in the clipped, precise language of legal professionals. I caught phrases like expansion of discovery and pattern of deliberate concealment. When she finished, she turned to me with renewed determination. "The judge has authorized an expedited subpoena for additional financial records. Detective Santos will handle service. This letter suggests a level of premeditation that elevates the seriousness of what we're dealing with." The machinery of justice was moving now, grinding forward with a momentum that both reassured and terrified me. I was standing up for myself, yes, but also watching the systematic dismantling of my son's life, a life I had helped build. After Ms. Chen left with the letter, I called Carol and asked if she could drive me to Sarah's grave. Hadn't visited in weeks, a lapse that suddenly seemed unbearable. The cemetery was peaceful under a blanket of fresh snow. Carol waited in the car, understanding my need for privacy. I cleared the snow from Sarah's headstone and stood there, my hand resting on the cold marble. "I wish you were here," I said softly. "You always knew what to do when Michael was in trouble. You'd know how to balance justice with mercy." The wind whispered through the bare branches overhead. No answer came, of course, but standing there in the quiet, I felt a measure of peace settle over me. Sarah would have been heartbroken by Michael's choices, but she would have faced the situation with the same quiet strength she had shown throughout our marriage. "I'm trying to do the right thing," I told her. "I just don't know what that is anymore." When I returned to the car, Carol didn't ask questions. She simply squeezed my hand and drove me home in comfortable silence. Sunday morning brought another development. Jim called early, his voice tight with concern. "Walt, you need to check the community Facebook page," he said without preamble. I didn't have Facebook, never saw the appeal, but Jim promised to come over and show me. 15 minutes later, we were sitting at my kitchen table, his laptop open between us. There on the screen was a post from Amber, complete with carefully selected family photos and a story that made my blood run cold. "With heavy hearts, Michael and I need to share a difficult family situation. Michael's father, Walter, has been experiencing cognitive decline for some time. We've tried to support him while respecting his independence, but recently he has become paranoid and confused, making false accusations against family members who only want what's best for him. Some of you may have heard rumors or seen unusual activity at his home. We ask for your understanding and compassion as we navigate this heartbreaking journey. Dementia can cause even the gentlest people to become suspicious and combative. We're working with medical professionals to ensure he gets the care he needs, and we appreciate your discretion during this painful time. If you see Walter, please know that any concerning stories he shares are unfortunately symptoms of his condition, not reality. Thank you for your support and prayers during this difficult time." The post had dozens of sympathetic comments, mostly from people who didn't know me personally but knew Michael and Amber from their church or social circles. A few expressed surprise, noting they had always found me perfectly lucid. These comments had been quickly buried under Amber's tearful emoji responses. "They're trying to control the narrative," Jim said grimly. "Create doubt about your competence before more people hear what really happened." I felt a cold anger solidify in my chest. Different from the hurt and betrayal of before, this was calculated, a deliberate attempt to discredit me and manipulate public opinion. "Call Ms. Chen," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "And Dr. Abernathy. I want a cognitive assessment on record immediately, and then I want to make a statement of my own." They die. Next 24 hours were a blur of activity. Dr. Abernathy came to my home Sunday afternoon, conducting a thorough examination and documenting his findings in an official letter stating I was of sound mind, with excellent cognitive function for a man of any age. Ms. Chen drafted a cease and desist letter regarding the false claims of dementia, which was delivered to Michael and Amber by Monday morning. But the most powerful response came from my neighbors. Without any prompting from me, they began commenting on Amber's post with their own recent interactions with me. Mrs. Petrillo described the advanced woodworking class I had taught at the senior center just last week. Jim posted photos from the community garden committee meeting I had chaired 3 days ago. Carol shared a picture of the chess game we had played over the weekend, noting that I had thoroughly trounced her as usual. By Monday afternoon, Amber had deleted the post, but not before several community members had taken screenshots. "The internet is forever," Jim said with grim satisfaction when he showed me the saved images. "They can't erase what they've done." That evening, Detective Santos called with an update. The subpoena had been served, and Michael and Amber's financial records were being examined. The preliminary findings were troubling. Multiple accounts opened in my name without my knowledge, credit cards I had never applied for, even a reverse mortgage application on my home that had thankfully been flagged as suspicious by the bank. "Mr. Henderson," Detective Santos said carefully, "based on what we're finding, the district attorney is considering elevating the charges to aggravated financial exploitation. This is no longer just about a life insurance policy or attempted bank transfers. This appears to be a systematic effort to gain control of your assets." "What does that mean for Michael?" I asked, my voice catching. "It means the possibility of serious charges." She replied honestly, "The DA will want to meet with you to discuss next steps." After we hung up, I sat in Sarah's chair by the window, watching night fall over the neighborhood. Houses lit up one by one, families gathering for dinner, normal lives continuing while mine seemed suspended in this strange limbo between justice and grief. The mason jar of coins still sat on my mantel where I had placed it Christmas night. I picked it up, feeling its modest weight. Such a small thing to have triggered such momentous consequences. Or perhaps not the trigger at all, but merely the final insult that had opened my eyes to what had been happening all along. I emptied the coins onto the coffee table and began to count them methodically, the way I had taught Michael to count his allowance decades ago. Quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies, $17.83 in total. Less than the cost of the wood I had used to make the box that now sat in Detective Santos's evidence locker. As I gathered the coins back into the jar, I made my decision about what needed to happen next. The district attorney's office was housed in a red brick building downtown, its weathered facade suggesting stability and permanence. Ms. Chen met me at the entrance, her briefcase and confidence equally reassuring as she guided me through security and up to the 3rd floor. District Attorney Eleanor Walsh was not what I expected. Instead of the stern, intimidating prosecutor I had imagined, she was a soft-spoken woman about my age, with silver hair cut in a practical bob and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. "Mr. Henderson," she said, rising to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming in. Please, have a seat." Her office was modest but warm, with framed family photos and law books sharing space on oak shelves. It reminded me, with a pang, of the principal's office at Burlington High, where I had spent so many lunch hours fixing whatever needed repair. "I've reviewed your case thoroughly," she began once we were settled. "The evidence Detective Santos has gathered is compelling and deeply troubling. Financial exploitation of the elderly is an issue I take very seriously." Ms. Chen nodded beside me. "We appreciate your attention to this matter." DA Walsh removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose briefly. "Before we discuss charges and legal remedies, I want to be very clear about something. Mr. Henderson, as the victim in this case, your input matters tremendously. While the final charging decisions rest with my office, I want to understand your perspective on how to proceed." I had anticipated this moment, rehearsed what I would say. Still, the words caught in my throat. "Michael is my son," I said finally. "What he and Amber did was wrong. Criminal, even. I understand that, but I don't want to see him in prison." DA Walsh studied me carefully. Many victims feel that way when the perpetrators are family members. It's completely understandable. However, I need to ensure you understand the seriousness of what occurred. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a one-time lapse in judgment. The evidence shows a calculated, ongoing attempt to systematically exploit you financially. I know, I said quietly. Believe me, I've had time to process that reality. But sending Michael to prison won't restore what's been broken between us. It won't teach him the lesson he needs to learn. What outcome are you hoping for, then? She asked. I leaned forward, suddenly eager to explain the plan I had been formulating since counting those coins. I want accountability, not punishment. I want Michael to face consequences that force him to understand the impact of his actions, but I don't want to destroy his life in the process. Ms. Chen looked concerned. Walter, we've discussed this. The attempted transfers alone constitute a serious felony. The unauthorized insurance policy, the forged documents, the false claims about your mental competence, these aren't minor offenses. I'm not suggesting we ignore them, I clarified. I'm suggesting we find a middle path. For the next hour, we discussed options and alternatives. D.A. Walsh was surprisingly receptive to creative solutions, though she maintained a clear-eyed view of the legal realities. By the time we finished, we had outlined an approach that satisfied both my desire for meaningful consequences and the legal system's need for justice. Michael and Amber would face charges, but with a plea agreement that included restitution for all documented financial losses, 3 years of probation with strict financial monitoring, mandatory financial literacy and ethics education, community service hours at the Senior Center's Elder Abuse Prevention Program, regular check-ins with a probation officer. Most importantly, they would have to make a public admission of their actions and apologize, not just to me, but to the community they had tried to deceive. This is unusually lenient given the circumstances, D.A. Walsh cautioned. I'm agreeing to this approach out of respect for your wishes and because it appears to be your son's first offense. But if they violate any terms of the agreement, the full charges will be reinstated. As we prepared to leave, she stopped me with a gentle hand on my arm. Mr. Henderson, may I speak frankly? As someone who's seen many cases like yours? I nodded. Your compassion is admirable, but please don't confuse it with an obligation to protect your son from the consequences of his actions. Sometimes the greatest act of parental love is allowing an adult child to experience the full weight of their choices. Her words stayed with me as Ms. Chen drove me home, echoing in my mind as I tried to reconcile my competing instincts, the father who wanted to shield his son from harm, and the man who demanded justice for a profound betrayal. The plea offer was delivered to Michael's attorney the following day. We expected negotiations, perhaps outright rejection. What we didn't expect was Michael showing up at my door that evening, alone. Jim happened to be dropping off groceries when Michael's car pulled up. He immediately positioned himself protectively on my porch. You shouldn't be here, Jim called out as Michael approached. There's a protection order. Michael stopped at the foot of the stairs, his face drawn and pale. He looked older than I remembered, worn down. By stress or guilt or both. I know, he said. I'm not staying. I just need 2 minutes to talk to my father. That's not for you to decide, Jim replied firmly. I placed a hand on Jim's shoulder. It's okay, 2 minutes. Jim reluctantly stepped aside, though he remained on the porch, arms crossed. Michael looked up at me, his expression unreadable. We got the plea offer. And? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Amber refused it. She wants to fight the charges. He swallowed hard. I don't. That surprised me. You're not in agreement? He shook his head. We haven't been in agreement about much lately, especially since... He gestured vaguely, encompassing the situation we found ourselves in. What are you saying, Michael? I asked, unwilling to make assumptions. I'm saying I want to accept the plea. I want to make this right, or as right as it can be. Amber and we're separating. Her mother's scheme, this whole situation, it's not who I want to be. I studied my son's face, looking for signs of manipulation or deception. Instead, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. The mask had slipped, revealing not the confident, successful man he pretended to be, but the boy who had once looked to me for guidance. 2 minutes are up, Jim said firmly. Michael nodded, stepping back. I just wanted you to know, before things proceed, I'm accepting the plea, regardless of what Amber decides. As he turned to leave, I found myself calling after him. Michael. He paused, looking back. Why the jar of coins? I asked, the question that had haunted me since Christmas night. Of all the ways to show what you thought of me, why that? His face crumpled slightly. It wasn't my idea. Amber and Darlene, they thought it was funny. I went along with it because… He shook his head. There's no excuse. I'm sorry, Dad. For all of it. As his car pulled away, Jim turned to me. Do you believe him? I stood in silence for a long moment, watching the taillights disappear down the street. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I think I want to. Spring came to Burlington with its usual tentative grace. Crocuses pushing through melting snow, daylight lingering a little longer each evening. 3 months had passed since that fateful Christmas dinner, and the world had reshuffled itself into new patterns. Michael accepted the plea agreement, despite Amber's continued protestations. They finalized their separation in February, and he moved into a small apartment downtown. Amber, facing the prospect of separate charges without the protection of a plea deal, eventually capitulated and accepted similar terms, though her community service was doubled at the judge's discretion after her courthouse demeanor revealed a distinct lack of remorse. Darlene returned to Florida permanently, the land deed now frozen in legal limbo as part of the ongoing proceedings. She sent a carefully worded letter of apology that read more like a legal disclaimer than genuine contrition, but I accepted it for what it was. Acknowledgement, if not true understanding. The neighborhood's protective circle around me gradually relaxed as the immediate crisis passed, though the experience had forged deeper connections than I had known in years. Carol and I developed a routine of Sunday chess games. Jim and I worked on restoring an old pickup truck in my garage. Mrs. Petrillo enlisted me to teach monthly woodworking classes at the senior center, where I found unexpected joy in passing on skills I had taken for granted. Life continued, as it always does. Different, but not entirely broken. Today was significant. The day of Michael's first supervised visit to my home since the protection order had been modified. Part of his probation included regular community service and restitution payments, but this was the first step toward whatever new relationship might be possible between us. I had spent the morning cleaning, though the house was, already spotless. I baked Sarah's apple pie, Michael's childhood favorite, more out of habit than expectation. Ms. Chen had cautioned me against setting expectations too high, against assuming one apologetic moment signaled complete transformation. Recovery from betrayal takes time, she had said during our last meeting, both for you and for Michael. The rebuilding of trust is a slow process, if it happens at all. At precisely 2 o'clock, a county social services car pulled into my driveway. Lisa Whitman, the caseworker assigned to supervise family reunification attempts, emerged first. Michael followed, carrying a small paper bag and looking as nervous as I felt. Mr. Henderson, Lisa greeted me warmly. We had met several times during the legal proceedings. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I'll be present throughout, but I'll try to stay in the background unless needed. I nodded, my eyes fixed on Michael. He looked different, thinner, his expensive watch and designer clothes replaced with simpler attire. The carefully maintained appearance that had always reminded me more of Amber's influence than the boy I had raised was gone. Hi, Dad, he said quietly. Michael, I replied, stepping aside to let them enter. The awkwardness of those first few minutes was excruciating. We sat in the living room, the same room where confrontations and revelations had unfolded months before. Lisa took a seat in the corner, clipboard in hand, but attention discreetly averted to provide a semblance of privacy. You look well, Michael offered eventually. The woodworking keeps me active, I replied. And the neighborhood watch committee. Turns out I've got a knack for organizing patrol schedules. He nodded, a small smile flickering across his face. I remember Mom always said you could organize anything if given enough index cards and coffee. The mention of Sarah eased some tension between us. She had always been our common ground, our shared love. I made pie, I said, grasping for normal conversation. If you'd like some. Your pie? Or Mom's recipe? He asked. Both, I suppose. I never could get the crust quite like hers. We moved to the kitchen, Lisa following at a respectful distance. As I served the pie, Michael placed the paper bag he'd been carrying on the table. I brought something, he said, his voice uncertain. If that's okay. Inside the bag was a mason jar. Not the same one from Christmas, but similar. This one contained no coins, Instead, it held a carefully folded document. "It's the deed to the land," he explained as I examined it. "I convinced Amber to sign it over as part of our separation agreement. It's not much, but I remembered how you talked about building a workshop there someday." I unfolded the deed, noting that it had been properly transferred and notarized. The legal description matched the property we had once visited together. The plot I had admired for its quiet location and mature trees. "Thank you," I said simply, refolding the document and placing it beside my plate. "It's not meant as a bribe," he added quickly, "or to make up for everything. I know that's not possible. It's just, it should have been yours all along." We ate pie in silence for a few minutes, the familiar taste bringing memories of happier times. Finally, Michael spoke again, his voice low and hesitant. "I've been seeing a therapist, part of the probation requirements initially, but I've continued because I needed to understand how I became someone who could do what I did to you." I set down my fork, giving him my full attention. "What have you learned?" I asked, genuinely curious. He considered his answer carefully. "That I spent years blaming you for things that weren't your fault. For Mom's death, as if you could have prevented it. For the pressure I felt to succeed, to have more than you had, when that pressure came from me, not you. For the man I wasn't brave enough to be." His honesty surprised me. This wasn't the practiced charm or smooth deflection I had grown accustomed to from him in recent years. "The jar of coins," he continued, gesturing to the empty mason jar between us. "It wasn't just Amber and Darlene's idea. I went along with it because part of me wanted to hurt you, to make you feel small, the way I sometimes felt growing up in the shadow of your goodness. I didn't know how to respond to that. The idea that my ordinary decency had somehow cast a shadow over my son was both painful and illuminating." Lisa made a note on her clipboard, her presence a reminder that this conversation was part of a formal process, not merely a personal reconciliation. "I don't expect forgiveness," Michael said, pushing his half-eaten pie away. "I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did. Not just the financial stuff, but the betrayal, the years of pulling away, the disrespect." I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and saw not just the man who had hurt me so deeply, but the sum of all he had been throughout his life. The toddler who had followed me around the house with a plastic hammer, the teenager who had stayed up all night helping me build a treehouse for the neighbors' kids, the young man who had wept at his mother's bedside. "Understanding," I said finally, "is where healing begins, for both of us." Summer settled over Burlington with languorous heat, turning the mountains hazy and the lake into a shimmering mirror. The garden behind my house bloomed with Sarah's perennials, black-eyed Susans, coneflowers, and her beloved peonies, heavy-headed and fragrant. 6 months had passed since the Christmas that changed everything. The legal proceedings were largely concluded, the community's interest had faded, and life had found its new rhythm. Michael's supervised visits had progressed to weekly dinners, each one less strained than the last. We weren't back to what we had been, we never would be, but we were building something new, brick by careful brick. He had taken a job at the community college, teaching business ethics of all things, a requirement of his plea agreement that had unexpectedly become a passion. Amber had moved to Connecticut with her mother, their departure from Burlington marked only by a terse email to Michael that he had shared with me during one of our dinners. Darlene had apparently found a new target for her. Ambitions, a widowed golf instructor with a waterfront condo. I wished him better discernment than I had shown. Today was significant, the first anniversary of Sarah's death. In previous years, Michael and I had marked the day separately, our grief too raw for sharing. This year we had decided to visit her grave together, then drive out to the land that was now officially mine. I was in the workshop putting the finishing touches on the second rocking chair when I heard Michael's car pull into the driveway. The chair was finally complete, a companion to the one Sarah and I had shared for so many evenings, its proportions and curves matching perfectly despite being crafted 5 years apart. "It's beautiful, Dad," Michael said from the doorway, his gaze appreciative as it swept over the polished wood. "Mom would have loved it. She helped design the original," I replied, running my hand over the smooth arm. "Said it had to have just the right curve for holding a book and a cup of tea at the same time." Michael smiled at that, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. These moments of shared remembrance had become our bridge, spanning the chasm that had opened between us. We loaded the chair into his car, and drove to the cemetery in comfortable silence. The day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of newly mown grass. Sarah's grave was well tended, the simple headstone adorned with fresh flowers. Someone from the neighborhood, Carol most likely, had been there ahead of us. Michael placed the bouquet of white roses we had brought beside the existing arrangement. I set a small framed photo of the three of us against the headstone. A camping trip from when Michael was about 12, all of us sunburned and smiling beside a mountain lake. I miss her every day, Michael said quietly. So do I replied. But she's still with us in ways that matter. We stood there for a while, lost in private memories. Then, by unspoken agreement, we returned to the car and headed out of town, toward the wooded lot that had played such a pivotal role in our story. The land was exactly as I remembered it. 2 acres of mixed forest with a small clearing perfect for a workshop. Oak, maple, and pine trees provided natural boundaries and welcome shade. A small stream trickled along the eastern edge, its gentle sound a constant, soothing presence. I've been thinking, Michael said as we walked the property line. If you still want to build a workshop out here, I'd like to help. I'm not as skilled as you, but I can learn. The offer touched me deeply, not just for the practical assistance, but for what it represented, a desire to reconnect through shared purpose, through creation rather than destruction. I'd like that, I said simply. We spent the afternoon there, clearing underbrush and marking potential building sites. The physical labor was therapeutic, the shared task bridging conversational gaps. By the time we returned to my house, sweaty and tired but satisfied, something had shifted subtly between us. Over dinner, Sarah's lasagna recipe that I had finally mastered, Michael brought up something unexpected. I've been thinking about the jar of coins, he said, setting down his fork. Not the Christmas one, but the one I gave you in April with the deed. I nodded, waiting. I want to start a new tradition with it, he continued. Something that honors Mom and helps rebuild what we lost. From his pocket, he pulled a single quarter, placing it on the table between us. Each time we work on the workshop together, I add a coin. When the jar is full, we donate it to the Elder Abuse Prevention Program at the Senior Center. Then we start over, a reminder that small contributions build something meaningful over time. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The transformation of something that had once represented humiliation into a token of healing and growth. It was precisely the kind of quiet wisdom Sarah would have appreciated. I think that's a fine idea, I said, my voice rougher than I intended. After dinner, we sat on the porch in the gathering dusk, the 2 rocking chairs side by side for the first time. The neighborhood settled into its evening rhythm around us. Children being called home, sprinklers turning on, the distant sound of a lawnmower making its final pass. Dad, Michael said after a comfortable silence, I want you to know something. I'm not asking for things to go back to how they were. I know that's not possible. But I'm grateful for the second chance, whatever form it takes. I studied my son's profile in the fading light, seeing shadows of both the boy he had been and the man he was becoming. When you're my age, I replied, you learn that most important things in life get a second chance. Not always in the way you expect, but if you're paying attention, the opportunity presents itself. We rocked quietly for a while, the chairs moving in unconscious synchronization. I've been offered a position on the city's Elder Affairs Committee, I said eventually. Apparently my experience makes me uniquely qualified to advocate for vulnerable seniors. Michael smiled. Are you going to take it? I think so. Seems like the right thing to do with what we've been through. Turn it toward something useful. The first stars appeared overhead, bright points against the deepening blue. From somewhere down the street came the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. The Ramirezes were hosting their annual summer barbecue. We should join them, Michael suggested, nodding toward the sound. If you want to, that is. I considered this. The public statement it would make about our reconciliation, the questions it might prompt, the watching eyes of neighbors who had witnessed the worst of our family's breakdown. Yes, I decided. I think it's time. As we walked down the street together, neither rushing nor lagging, I felt Sarah's presence almost tangibly between us. Not as a ghost, but as a continuing influence, a shared love that had weathered betrayal and found its way back to the surface. The Ramirezes welcomed us warmly, their backyard strung with lights that glowed like earthbound stars. Conversations paused briefly as we entered, then resumed with tactful normality. Jim raised his glass slightly in my direction, a silent acknowledgement of the milestone this moment represented. Later, as the gathering wound down and we prepared to leave, Mrs. Petrillo approached us, her eyes bright despite her advanced years. "Walter," she said, patting my arm, "Sarah would be proud of you both." The simple statement, offered without elaboration, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Michael's hand found my shoulder, a tentative gesture of support that I leaned into slightly. Walking home under a canopy of stars, I thought about the mason jar waiting on my mantel, no longer a symbol of humiliation, but a vessel for rebuilding, coin by modest coin. Some wounds never fully heal, but they can transform into something different. Scars that tell a story of survival, of resilience, of the complicated miracle of human connection. The truth had indeed come to light, just as I had intended that Christmas night when I placed the box on my porch. But the revelation had accomplished something I hadn't dared to hope for. Not just justice, but the beginning of restoration. As we reached my front door, Michael paused. "I should head home," he said. "Early class tomorrow." I nodded, suddenly aware of how much the word home had changed its meaning for us both. "Next Saturday for workshop planning?" I asked. "I'll be here," he promised, with proper work gloves this time. We parted with a brief, still awkward hug that nonetheless contained more truth than all the elaborate performances of family harmony that had preceded our falling out. Inside, I placed the quarter Michael had given me into the mason jar. It made a satisfying clink against the glass, a small sound, almost insignificant, but the beginning of something that might, with time and patience, amount to something of value. Every penny counts after all.